Good morning. Do you remember what it was like to see the world through the eyes of a child? If you have forgotten, permit me to refresh your memory. Children focus on the obvious, on what we adults see clearly but choose to ignore. More often than not, the news they bring us is plain spoken. Simply put, honest. This morning, at the outset of our 21st General Chapter, I invite all of us to take for ourselves the eyes of a poor child. For we must assess, as best as possible and as fully as we can, to what degree the life and mission of Marcel and Champagne's Little Brothers of Mary are being lived out today with zeal and passion, in keeping with the calls of the Church and the signs of our times. Yes, we must ask ourselves whether or not, like our founder, we are above all else in love with Jesus Christ and credibly visible among the poor children and young people who so captured Marcelin's heart. A chapter, though, is so much more than a time set aside for assessment, for measuring whether or not we are living up to one ideal or another. Like those that have come before it, this 21st General Chapter is a time of extraordinary grace for our Institute and all who are part of its life and mission. So let us sit up and take notice, for we have here at hand the opportunity we need to initiate the fundamental change of heart that we claim to seek. When capitulants gathered in this space in 1967, 2 years after the close of Vatican II, for our extraordinary chapter of renewal, they had little idea of what lay ahead. However, the message of an ecumenical council, the first in 100 years, had stirred their hearts and raised their hopes. And so they set out with faith, with courage, and with a love for our Institute to remake Marist life and mission for a new age. As they began that journey of renewal, however, those brothers of ours knew full well that at some time in the future there would be a day of reckoning, a time when others like themselves would gather once again. Fellow pilgrims who carried in their hearts the dream of Marcel and Champagne and had lived the experience of renewal long enough that they could not help but speak the truth simply and without hesitation, and make decisions that were daring, courageous, even unexpected. Here, 8 years shy of our 200th anniversary as an institute, we must accept the fact that we are those fellow pilgrims, and that now is the time of decision-making. This morning, I want to address several areas, including consecrated life, identity and formation, restructuring and internationality, governance and animation, and Marist lay partnership. Regarding the last, I want to explore how we can promote this movement today without paternalism and without turning it into a clone of consecrated life. Put simply, how do we join energy with our Marist lay partners to arrive at a spirituality and sense of self-understanding that is truly Marist and truly of the laity. A general context. Let's be honest. As an institute, we have spent the last half-century falling apart. So it should be a surprise to no one that today we struggle with concerns about our identity, the future of our way of life, the burden of scandal that has been ours to bear in several places. As brothers, we have always been a pragmatic lot. This approach to life served us well during the years from the Council of Trent up until Vatican II, when the basics of religious life were clearly defined. We knew the meaning of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and understood what was expected of us in community, as well as our obligations for prayer. With that knowledge in hand, we got on with the details of our daily ministry as teachers, administrators, counselors, youth ministers, and the like. Fortunately or unfortunately, in many parts of the Institute, this pragmatic approach to our way of life fell apart during the late 1960s, with the basics of religious life suddenly open to question. More than a few of us were no longer certain about the significance of the vows. Some also began to question the meaning of community and the place of prayer in our lives. Dress changed. Schedules were altered. New styles of community began to emerge. But the profound change of heart necessary for genuine renewal failed to take place. As the identity of religious life lost some of its sharp definition, many members of clerical orders looked to their priesthood to give them meaning and purpose. Likewise, as our identity as religious brothers began to weaken, more than a few of us have turned to professionalism to help fill the void. For some among us, academic credentials, as important as they might be in one situation or another, have taken on a meaning far in excess of their value. In a number of places, we also began to evaluate the excellence of our schools, not in terms of their ability to evangelize, but rather by their ability to attract ever brighter students. This picture is further complicated by the fact that all that has transpired during the last half-century or so has been reflected within the Institute through the experience of three different and distinct generations. The oldest, which grows ever smaller with each passing year, remembers what our way of life looked like prior to Vatican II. They can recall the Latin Mass, as well as the day when the priest turned from facing the wall and began slowly to introduce the vernacular into the celebration of the Eucharist. A second group came to maturity as John the 23rd was calling for the council to take place. Many of them were quickly immersed in what is known as modernity, putting aside certain privileges and casting off the symbols and ways of living that had separated us from the people of God. These brothers challenged you and me to face the same questions about life and meaning that everyone else had to address. This generation had the task of leading our institute through a time of loss, an important period wherein we question the meaning and purpose of our way of life. privileged to have been present at the death of one era of church history. They are blessed today with the opportunity to help facilitate the birth of another. The renewal questions of 2009 and 2010, however, are not those of the 1960s or the 1980s. Today, a new generation is looking at our way of life and mission through eyes shaped by a world that is foreign to many of us over the age of 50. More than a few of them lack a strong Catholic identity, as defined by the practices of the past. Those who are coming to our Marist way of life in many parts of our world at this moment in time have lived with questions since childhood and are now looking for some answers and insist on having clear signs that mark them as religious men. Speak with them, and you will discover quickly that Vatican II is someone else's history. As an institute, then, we have passed through a difficult half-century. The Council was a seismic event. When the first dust had settled, we all found ourselves standing in a different place. During the years since, we have become increasingly aware of the massive social justice problems spawned by modernity, as well as the crisis of faith that exists and that has its origins in the theological challenges of postmodernity being played out within the context of a highly polarized church. Many blessings have also been ours during this period. First of all, the living presence and protection of Mary, the mother of Jesus, has been evident throughout. We have also been blessed with exceptional leaders who kept hope alive as we made our way across an arid desert. Leaders such as Basilio, Charles, Benito, and their councils. A word of thanks to each of them. The growth of a deeper spirit of fraternity also got underway during this period, as did our Marist lay partnership movement. These initiatives added an air of expectation about what the future might hold for us all. Like our brothers in 1967, we stand at a crossroad. Building the future of Marist life and mission will require us to make decisions that allow us to be who we were meant to be. Men in love with God, brothers visibly evangelizing poor children and young people, religious building communities marked by a spirit of hospitality and welcome, and like the founder, disciples of the Lord with the heart of a missionary. Those who made up the membership of our 16th General Chapter, conscious of their responsibilities, gave themselves the time they needed and gathered together the resources necessary to do the job. Though they might have been unaware of the fact at the time, their challenge was to initiate a period during which much of what was familiar to at least one generation of brothers would simply pass away. They helped move us to a place where we had to rely on God more than ourselves. Consecrated life and formation. Vatican II should have left no doubt in anyone's mind that everyone is called to the one and same holiness and to participation in the Church's mission in virtue of our baptism. Today we are more aware than ever before that the fullness of the Christian life is the vocation of all the faithful. Recognition of this universal call to holiness and mission forced consecrated life to redefine itself for a new age. For prior to Vatican II, most of us had been taught that this way of life was separate from and superior to the life of a Christian layman or woman. The Council reminded us that none of the features intrinsic to Christian identity and life are the exclusive trait of a particular state of life. For example, prayer, community, chastity, love of neighbor, fidelity, and so many other qualities are found in Christian laymen and women, as well as in those of us who have chosen religious life. So what makes consecrated life different? Pure and simple, consecrated celibacy. One of the aspects about our lives that we have the most difficulty discussing. Like the Hebrew prophets of old, a brother is a man claimed by God, a person whose life has been taken over by God to the exclusion of any other primary commitment. To insist that our way of life is a mystery is not to dodge the question about its meaning. Rather, it is to state clearly that the relationship between God and a person that results in a free commitment of lifelong consecrated celibacy is as unfathomable as the attraction between two people that leads to marriage. Mysteries cannot be explained, only reverently explored. Consecrated life is a permanent, stable, and public way of life within the Church. Unfortunately, when Vatican II clarified the fact that men and women religious were not an intermediate state or class of people situated somewhere between clergy and laity, some of us concluded by process of elimination that since we were not clergy, we must be laity. This outcome was neither the intention of the Council nor is it compatible with experience. It is, however, the cause of some of our questions about identity today. Those who made up the Council body did us a service by reminding us all that religious life was meant to be part of the charismatic and not the hierarchical structure of the Church. But that does not mean it is not a state of life. Both Lumen Gentium and Perfecte Caritatis recognize it as such, distinct from both those who are ordained and the laity. As men religious who are non-ordained, however, we have a special obligation to be the conscience of the Church. By living our way of life well, placing ourselves in those situations and locations where it is difficult for others to go, and working to meet needs that are just being identified and for which institutional resources do not exist, we remind the Church about its true nature. Yes, by our sense of hospitality, the compassion we show to others, our concern for those whom no one else will serve, our presence at the margins, we make the risen Lord known and loved in our world today and remind the Church about what it is meant to be, what it longs to be, what it must be. As we approach this chapter, then, we must commit ourselves to doing the work necessary to clarify the place and purpose of our way of life within the Church. We may not accomplish that task fully during the time provided, but we must set in place the means to do it eventually. More importantly, we must take on ourselves the spirit of those who made up the 1967 chapter and, like our founder, set our sights on the future. As the delegates of 1967 had responsibility for initiating a period of transformation, our responsibility is to begin to build the future. And so during these days together, we must make decisions about our way of life that will help us take some initial steps towards that future, realizing all the while that to build it fully will take the lifetime of many of us here. However, though we know full well that that future will outlast us all, we can be equally sure that we will live on in the future that we create. If we are unclear about our identity, we will convey that lack of clarity to those entrusted to us for formation. The process of formation is in part an initiation to our way of life, as well as a preparation to live it fully. Unfortunately, we appear to offer preparation for some aspects of our way of life and not for others. Take initial formation, for example. Our documents say that its goal is the formation of Marist apostles. However, what that last phrase means exactly appears to be understood differently in various regions of the Institute. And the emphasis falls often on professional preparation or personal development rather than a change of heart. Several years ago, for example, I received a note from a young brother. He had just completed his 2-year novitiate and was now teaching and living in community. He wrote, "Thank you for this opportunity, for this 2-year experience. It was a wonderful time of personal growth for me." No mention of Jesus Christ. No reference to becoming a living portrait of the founder. I believe that we have to take a hard look at what we are doing in the area of formation throughout the Institute. And using the formation guide as a frame of reference, ensure that we are giving our young brothers the best preparation possible for our way of life. We need to keep in mind also that formation is a spiritual journey and not solely professional preparation. Consequently, for me personally, initial formation should include a 3-year scholasticate aimed at forming a young religious who will be a Marist apostle. And if we want to embrace the new world that our chapter motto claims we are engaging, I recommend that we establish 4 or 5 regional scholasticates and mix the population of each of them from all parts of our Marist world so that they are represented in each of these centers. Next, put together 4 or 5 of the best formation staffs that we can assemble from throughout the Institute and assign them to these centers. Within a generation, we would have a network of brothers with international experience and relationships with other brothers from throughout our Marist world. I pray that they would be open to mission in those places where the church and the poor children and young people of our world call them and us to be. Furthermore, these young brothers would have an increasingly greater global perspective and a more realistic appreciation of what other parts of the Institute are facing. Likewise, I believe we need to review our program of ongoing formation. Here we need to be sure that these programs are aimed at spiritual renewal and provide those involved with a significant opportunity to meet and talk over with someone their life of faith. Some of these programs might well be constructed for brothers and lay Marists together, while others would serve one or the other group alone. Finally, we need to develop new means for preparing young brothers and ourselves for the communities of today and tomorrow. Far too many people are leaving our way of life, expressing disillusionment with the quality of community life. For too long has this problem existed. An assumption is made that because we grew up in a family, we know how to live with others. But a community is not a family in the traditional sense. It is rather a group of adult believers trying to live their lives centered on the gospel. Just what does that mean today? And how can we best prepare one another for life together? Are questions that merit asking and deserve an answer. Internationality. In recent years, one of the few general chapter outcomes that caught the attention of many was the recommendation of those who made up our 1993 chapter that some restructuring take place within the Institute, especially in those places whose future viability and vitality was in question. I would dare say, however, that most chapter capitulants left Rome with the belief that restructuring would happen somewhere within the Institute, but would have little impact on them and their lives. The new world about which we speak is becoming increasingly international and multicultural. As an institute, we have taken some initial steps in this direction. Our efforts, however, have failed to bear the fruit we expected. For example, as mentioned a moment ago, in 1993, General Chapter delegates initiated a process of restructuring. The incoming General Council eventually made the judgment that the Institute at large could benefit from asking questions about vitality and viability. Two errors, however, were made initially. To begin with, in the mind of some, restructuring became associated with geographic reorganization. They held fast to the belief that once a province made a decision to come together with another province or provinces, restructuring had taken place. In all honesty, we have reconfigured as an institute, but we have not restructured. The aim of restructuring is greater vitality and viability for Marist life and mission. The 1993-2001 General Council developed a set of criteria that, when applied, would increase the chances of both vitality and viability. These criteria were not taken up widely. Today, we need to revisit the entire process of restructuring and address the work that remains. Should we fail to do so, we will sow the seeds of future problems. The members of some former provinces will end up complaining that they have been colonized. In others, the class of values held in 2 or 3 former provinces will become more apparent and interfere with establishing any sense of unity. We need to move towards greater internationality in other ways also. For example, we are one of the institutes in the Church today that lacks a common language among its members. In many other congregations, all members learn to speak the language of the founder or foundress. At the very least, having such an ability gives them access to all the works of their founder or foundress and early members. It also makes their coming together in international settings all the more fruitful on a personal level. Understandably, regions may choose to work in another language, but it would appear to me to be a benefit today to continue to work in our 4 approved languages, but to agree that everyone will acquire ability in French, the language of the founder. Government and animation. At all levels of the Institute, we must decide what it is that we want from government, and then we must provide the resources to make that possible. When the results of the sondage for a provincial arrives at my desk, the list of qualities expected and characteristics anticipated in the person who will take up this role is well beyond the reach of most, if not all of us. A similar dilemma exists when we consider general administration. Past chapters have had the tendency of leaving a long list of chores for the new administration to carry out. There is generally a list of mandates, followed by recommendations, followed by some general lines of thinking. All well and good if what is mandated can be accomplished with the personnel provided. But is this the best way to construct a general administration? Is this approach of greatest benefit to the Institute? A change in the makeup of the General Council is another area that merits review. During the chapter of 1993, the General Econome and General Secretary were removed as council positions. To the best of my recollection, this action was taken to allow the General Council to choose brothers for these positions rather than having them elected by the chapter. In this way, a wider pool of candidates would be available and perhaps a better match made between the person and the position. However, another argument put forward in support of removing both positions from the Council was the belief that the General Secretary and Econome had limited knowledge of the Institute in comparison to other members of the Council, and therefore were not in a position to make decisions in an informed way. This point of view, in my opinion, has not proven to be true and puts limits on the contribution that both the General Secretary and General Econome could make to Council business. In other words, it's working against us as an institute. In recent years, both brothers in both positions have had contact with all areas of the Institute. They are also in touch with a network of people, province secretaries and economes, who are crucial to the life of the Institute and its mission. While still allowing the General Council the right to name the General Secretary and Econome, I believe that these positions should be restored as members of the General Council. Next, we need to develop new structures that will help us address quickly pressing needs or problems within the Institute. I would recommend that consideration be given to establishing the concept of a Congress of Provincials, both on a regional and international basis. This group could be called into session to deal with issues in a particular part of the Institute, or where the matter was facing the Institute as a whole. It could be convened internationally. Provincials and district superiors are immersed in the day-to-day issues of any region and have the best first-hand information for dealing with issues that might arise or for addressing the challenges of long-range planning. Would this work be best undertaken in conjunction with the general administration? For what reason? The general administration would hopefully bring to the discussion a worldwide Marist perspective. Working together with a regional or international Congress of Provincials, we would be in a better position to address issues and challenges intensely as they arise and arrive more quickly at a solution. There are many other areas that could be mentioned. Visits of the General Council or the Superior General, the General Conference, etc. My point is this. The chapter needs to decide on the challenges facing our Institute today and during the 8 years just ahead. It also needs to decide on its expectations of both province and general administration. And then it needs to find the team that can best address these challenges and meet those needs. Marist laity. Next year marks 25 years since the idea of the Champagne movement of the Marist family was conceived. During the years since, Marist partnership has developed rapidly to the point where we are today. Since those early days, we have come to understand more fully that a spirituality that is truly lay and genuinely Marist can only emerge from Marist lay experience and nowhere else. Developed by Marist lay leadership, it will aim at promoting a type of personal practice and involvement in ministry that is keeping with and truly transformative of lay Marist life in the Church. How tragic it would be if Marist lay spirituality ended up being simply a variant on the religious spirituality of the Institute. One rich and unique experience of the charism that came into our church through Marcel Champagne would be lost. The writings and reflections of Marist lay women and men have validity simply because they are the experience of Marcel's charism as lived out in the life of a lay man or woman. We all have a lot to learn from one another. In some parts of our Institute, Marist schools have been founded by lay men and women alone. In at least one instance, a brother came later to join the staff, but the foundation and early years were the work solely of Marist laity. If schools can be established, why not Marist lay communities founded by lay men and women? What is the brothers' role in the Marist lay movement? Our job is to assist without taking over. In doing so, we will participate in what many consider to be one of the most important experiences of renewal at this time in church history: the emergence of a fully adult and responsible laity. At this chapter, we need to make decisions that will allow that outcome to be possible. Looking back on this chapter years from now, others will make an assessment. Let us therefore make bold decisions that will move the Institute and its mission into the future. Let us make the type of decisions that will cause others to say that this chapter numbered among the Institute's finest. Conclusion. Permit me to conclude on a personal note. 2 comments. The first is about my health. Wherever I go, people invariably ask, "How is your health?" Let me answer that question with a story. At his first press conference after being appointed Archbishop of New York, a reporter asked Timothy Dolan if he could say a few words about the difference between himself as a young priest and today as Archbishop. Without a moment's hesitation, Dolan responded, "The biggest difference between myself as a young priest and myself today is about 25 kilos. Now, I am pleased to report today that for the current Superior General, the difference between myself today and myself 8 years ago is actually less than 25 kilos. I did not have a heart attack, though I had 2 stents put in my heart. I seem to be one of those fortunate people whom doctors are able to keep 2 steps ahead of disaster. I pray it continues. Second, I have loved this ministry of the last 8 years. How could I not? I had a wonderful mentor in Benito, a vicar in Lewis whom I have come to love as a brother, a creative and dedicated council community in Antonio, Emily, Jean, Maurice, Pedro, Peter, Tianest, and Victor, and earlier in Dick Dunleavy, Antonio Martinez, and Yvonne Bedard. The members of the General House community, with Anno as their most recent director, have been a blessing. Juan Miguel Anaya's sage advice as procurator and Giovanni Bagato's hard work as postulator, Anthony's efforts as administrator, and Javier's as house econome have been most welcome. And Don Neary, in particular, has been a lifesaver these past 6 years. Knowing the goodness and dedication of so many provincials and district superiors, and having come to know brothers of our institute and so many of our lay partners, I have great hope for the future. As for myself, I am a rather simple person. The work of the last 8 years has taught me many lessons about my own limits as a person, my own sinfulness as a man. For what we have been able to accomplish as a government, I must give credit to Lewis and the Council and to so many others. For the mistakes that we made, I must take responsibility. So thank you for the privilege of having this opportunity to serve the Institute in this way. I shall treasure these days always, and all of you also. May Mary and Marceline continue to accompany us during the days ahead, and may our good God continue to bless each of us and our Institute, and the mission as well as the poor children and young people whom we have been called to serve. Many thanks.